Hello, this is Steve Powers. Welcome back. Today I'm going to show you the same process that I showed you in a previous fan art demonstration, where I've taken a sketch, scanned it in, printed it out onto bristle uh, paper that I cut down to size so it would go through the printer. You might be able to do that with watercolor paper as well. But in this case, anything that is suitable for watercolors, and in this case is also quite suitable for colored pencils. So let me go into time lapse and we will discuss this in a second. So you can see here where it is just printed out lightly. Keep in mind that the printed the printer ink is water soluble. So if I use a lot of water all at once, I will I can make that ink run. So in this case, use it sparingly. I'm not wetting anything down ahead of time. I'm not doing a wet on wet technique. I'm just going in here with some light applications, starting with light colors as well. So I do want to work right up to the lines because we're going to use that as a guide and shading um, for the painting itself. You'll see how it will work together. Now you can see where the nose has a little bit more ink on it. It also means I have to put a little bit more layers of color on there because that ink is actually mixing with the colors. Something to keep in mind. So if you have too much ink, if it's a very dark print, your colors are going to look muddy. So try to lighten it as much as you can. Um, of course, the other way of doing this is to just transfer it using a light box, which is my preferred method, actually. This is great for little studies where you might try to use a different technique to colorize it, maybe with pencils or gouache or what have you, different mediums. And you don't want to have to draw the thing over and over and over again. So this one, you could do it until you get it right because I am not, all I have to do is reprint it once I scan it in once. Um, if you notice too here, I'm also building it. This is something that my process of doing it is I build the colors up. So I get that base layer down. I add a little bit more, add a little darker in the shadow areas. It's a pseudo realism because I am trying to get a 3D a feel to it where yeah, value change equals form change. You'll hear me say that a million times. That's something that goes over and over in my head. Um, Here I am picking up some of the color that uh, went over. I'm just using some clean water to make it wet again and a clean rag to pick it up. Um, that's one thing about watercolors, it's very versatile. Now, if I was to do this more accurately in the shadows, I wouldn't add more color, make it darker color. I would use add a little bit of blue to it, um, or like a not gray, but blue is a darker blue mixed in with your colors will add more of a realistic shadow. In this case, I just went with a cartoon style where it's darker on the shadow side than it is on the lighter side, um, on the light side. And that's something you want to think about too. Where is my light coming from? What is my light source? In this case, I'm outside, so my light source is probably going to be a yellow influence from the sun. Okay, but it could also be blue as well because it's a little bit of yellow and blue because um, it's uh, has that influence of the blue sky. Again, a lot of outside scenes will have a blue in the shadow because it's going to have that influence from the skies color, and also then the sunlight is going to come in from the other side. So the shadow side would be bluer, where the other side is going to be, in this case, yellow. Of course, that is a general simplified representation of um, lighting. So yes, you're also going to have your bounce lighting and all that, but here it is. We are doing a cartoon. Okay, so it's going to be very orange, more orange than it would be normally. The stripe's going to be, I could have probably done blacker than I actually did here. But uh, I do start with the lighter colors. Um, this way you can overlap. If you overlap into the darker colors, it's easier to fix. There's no big deal with it. Um, Now, this is not meant to be a full-blown tutorial in coloring. It's really just the process that of one process that can be utilized for this. I mean, I'm already going in here and getting in um, the grass, okay? And this is just a little swatch of grass. I don't even have a blue sky in here or a green background or anything like that. But those are the things you want to think about is if your character in this case is orange, what other colors work well with it? Because that is a warm color, and there's going to be a contrasting cool color. In this case, this green could have had a little bit more of a blue hue to it as well, because the orange is blue is contrast by the orange and vice versa. Um, but this again, this is he's sitting on a little swatch of grass, having fun in the sun. Here I am going in with a little bit more yellow, making it the yellow areas a little bit brighter, a little bit more finished with the colored pencil. Again, that is the reason I like the bristle over, say, hot press papers. It takes colored pencils uh, smoother at a smaller size. I mean, if you do a larger size, you do it a larger rendering, a lot of your brush strokes, a lot of your pencil strokes, they're going to be minimized when you go to um, um, print this, or rather, when you go to uh, display it digitally, because you're not going to see the full size of it. You're seeing a smaller version of it, so um, uh, that image will, all that information in the image will be then um, compacted into a smaller format. And it's the way a lot of digital artists will like to work twice the size of what they're going to display it at, because a um, you can lose a lot of those brush strokes and make it look smoother and more, make it look a little nicer. Um, if that's what you're trying to do, and minimize any of uh, your your brush strokes, your mistakes, or what have you. And I won't call them mistakes, but you're doing a quick rendering sometimes, and you want to make it look a little bit more polished, and you want to do it quickly. That's the way a lot of the digital artists do it. Well, in this case, I'm doing it small, so I need smooth paper. So that's another way of doing it, and in this case, it works quite well. You can see here I'm using colored pencils. In this case, these are black because I can get a nice gray tone out of it as well. I use that a lot for the line work. Sometimes my inking is actually done with a colored pencil, but I also use, if I'm working on green, I try to get different variations of the green with the pencils as well. Um, and you can see here I'm outlining it, and I'm trying to get the darker side, by the way, on the shadow side of it. Um, so you build it up, and you can take away a little bit on this. Now, with colored pencils, you can erase. Keep in mind, this is, do not erase uh, wet paper. You will just rip the paper. So wait for it to dry if you see something, or just build past it. Build through your mistakes. Paint through your mistakes. You can do that. Um, You can see here where I had a little bit of that orange bleed over. Kind of trying to incorporate that in there so it looks more realistic, um, or as is supposed to be part of it. Right now I'm using the black as for gray tone, adding a little bit of a gray to that. And again, I could have used a darker blue. Um, but keep in mind, it's reason I'm using watercolors over the color pencils for the whole thing is watercolors are fast. Watercolors are cheap. They mix very well together. They're very forgiving. They work well with graphite. They work well with ink. They work well with colored pencils, of course. And I can go in here and actually use watercolors now over this colored pencil. Colored pencil is not going to uh, get washed out per se. It might, depending on how much pigment you use in your watercolors, um, that pigment can actually work in an opaque fashion and cover up your pencil work. So in that case, then you would go back in with the colored pencil or go in and re-ink it. Because of course you can cover up ink as well if you work with thicker paints. Gouache being more opaque anyways, but even with a straight transparent watercolors, they don't have to be transparent if you use um, a dry brush technique. Or if you're, which is a damp brush where you pick up a lot of pigment and you start brushing it in there, and you can use thick um, straight out of the tube, mind you. You can use a thick coat as well, and that will actually give it a little bit of 3D, three-dimensional feel to it. Um, but in general, it's you can use the colored pencils and the ink and transparent watercolors and have no problem with them not obliterating your line work. Um, so another good reason to be using that ink from the printing as a reference is there's going to be a little bit more detail there than if you use the light box, because when we use a light box, really we're only doing the contour lines and things like that, and the details and stuff, and then we're going to go back in there and you know basically redo it anyways. Now again, if you do this technique, do use this technique, um, lighten up the line work enough that you can see it, um, but not so much where you're going to start uh, uh, bleeding or making the ink bleed and mix with your colors, because we don't want muddy colors. We want nice hues. And the reason, by the way, that I'm coloring a lot of these is I did these in graphite a while back, and I have a son, I have a couple sons, one that I did them for, and then the other one says, it needs color. So basically, in a child's world, and I think it's in most of our world, we like color. We respond to color. Color adds another dimension to a drawing. A drawing, in my sense, my definition of a drawing is usually with pencils. You can do it with ink and stuff, but you'll see these beautiful rendered uh, pieces in charcoal or in graphite, and they're beautiful. But then you have a child that comes along and looks at it and says, it needs color. So what do you have to do? Something like this. You truly have to love children. They look at things quite distinctly and with a definite opinion. Well, this brings us to an end of another video, and hopefully there's something that you can take away from it and apply to your own work. And thank you for enduring listening to my ramblings, and I'll see you next time. Have a good day. Thank you.